Jason Arde is dead. The New York Times reported it Friday. 41 years old, found unresponsive at a home in South London. Police say the death is being treated as unexpected but not suspicious. His family put out a statement saying he had been subjected to a campaign of sustained abuse and that the campaign of misinformation was too much for Jason. Last week, he resigned from Cambridge. The university had just announced an investigation into allegations of plagiarism and fabrication. A few weeks before that, the whole story started coming apart in public. So let's look at what actually happened. Jason Arde was hired by Cambridge in 2023 as its youngest black professor, an established chair of education at Jesus College. The media loved the story. Working class kid from South London, Ghanaian immigrant parents, severe learning difficulties. He said he couldn't speak until he was 11 and couldn't read until he was 18. Then, somehow, 2 decades later, he's a Cambridge professor lecturing on racism in higher education. The ultimate feel-good narrative. Overcoming everything, representation, progress. Then the questions started. A blog post went up detailing extensive plagiarism in his PhD dissertation, dozens of passages that tracked almost word for word with an earlier thesis by another scholar. Other papers of his had problems too. Interview quotes that looked recycled, data that didn't hold up, claims about his own life that started falling apart under scrutiny. Extreme running feats. Millions raised for charity. The details kept shifting. Cambridge's first response? They called the criticism a vile campaign to undermine him. They circled the wagons. Some faculty signed open letters defending him. The narrative was already set. Any scrutiny of this man must be racist, or ableist, or both. Only when the pressure became impossible to ignore did the university finally announce an investigation. The same day, Arday resigned. He said the relentless public scrutiny had taken a profound toll. He denied being a liar. He blamed autism and poor supervision for the problems in his early work. 9 days later, he was dead. Now, the family says the campaign of misinformation killed him. The media is carefully framing the story around the pain of the scrutiny and the beauty of the original narrative. What almost no one wants to say out loud is the obvious thing. This is what happens when you put someone in a position they are not prepared for reasons that have nothing to do with their actual ability to do the job. Cambridge didn't hire Jason Arde because he was the strongest candidate in educational sociology. They hired him because the story was perfect. Youngest black professor. Inspirational backstory. Exactly the kind of appointment that looks good in a diversity report and makes the institution feel virtuous. Warnings about his work had already been circulating inside academia for years. They were ignored because the narrative was more important than the competence. When you elevate someone primarily on identity and narrative, you don't free them, you trap them. You put them in a role where the gap between the image and the reality is so large that the only ways to survive are to keep performing the story or to start cutting corners. Plagiarism, embellishment, fabrication, whatever it takes to keep the performance going. And when the performance finally collapses, the pressure is crushing because the entire system that elevated you will suddenly discover standards again the moment the embarrassment becomes too public. Imagine if, instead of being fast-tracked into one of the most elite academic chairs in the world on the strength of a compelling personal story, Jason Arde had been allowed or required to build a career that actually matched what he could do. Something real, something sustainable, something that didn't require constant myth-making. He might still be alive. He might have had a career he could actually live with. But that wasn't the incentive structure. The incentive structure rewarded the story, and the story eventually killed the man. This is the part that defenders of DEI never want to talk about. They talk endlessly about opportunity and representation. They almost never talk about the human cost of placing people in positions where the gap between expectation and capacity is massive, and then acting shocks when it ends in disaster. Jason Arde's death is a tragedy. It is also a predictable one. When you treat academic appointments, or any appointments, like a moral theater instead of a search for the best people, this is what you get. Broken careers, broken institutions, and sometimes broken lives. That's the story the New York Times isn't telling, but it's the one that matters.